Hello, Justin Boyd, History 701, covering historical newspapers, how President Roosevelt saved football. So in the early 1900s, there were serious attempts to abolish football because the sport was considered excessively violent, leading to a high number of injuries and even deaths among players, with limited protective gear and brutal playing styles prompting concerns from educators, parents, and even President Theodore Roosevelt, who pushed for significant rule changes to make the game safer. Why did they want to abolish football? Well, one was extreme violence. Early football was played with very little padding, allowing for dangerous and often brutal tactics like human battering rams, which resulted in severe injuries and fatalities. Public outcry. The high number of injuries and deaths on the field drew significant public criticism, with newspapers reporting on the death harvest of college football seasons. Pressure from universities. Several prominent universities like Harvard and Columbia threatened to drop the football program entirely due to concerns about player safety. The first article is Football's Death List. In 5 years, 45 players have lost their lives. This is an article in the Baltimore Sun published October 13th, 1905. So, unnecessary roughness. Most deaths resulted in actions not associated with football play but kicks to the stomach, head, and neck while players are already on the ground. So while I was reading this article, he was writing it in a way to where it almost made me think of the early 1900s announcers of games. So I'm going to say this quote in the way I was hearing it in my head when I read the article. So this kind of stood out to me. So the author stated, and I quote, "The death list doesn't include any players on teams and the leaders in football, but not a season goes by in which the best trained players are not seriously hurt. As a rule, boys, the players who are killed were on minor teams or not themselves sufficiently hardened to endure the strain of the game." So what this brought to me when I read it was almost putting the blame on the players that were killed for not being ready for the game and not really focusing on the issue of the unnecessary roughness and other problems that led to it. So 3 paragraphs mention the deaths of the players, and the following 6 paragraphs focused on the injured players on the Harvard, Yale, Carlisle, Maine, and other prominent football programs of the time. Little emphasis was actually put on the deaths of others, and implying that they're just not up to par with the prominent programs. The second article is Here's Football Men, Coaches in Conference with President Roosevelt. This article was in the Washington Post, published October 10th, 1905. Roosevelt's son. Roosevelt's son was injured and broke his nose deliberately by his opponents while playing football for Yale. Following his son's injuries, Roosevelt became a vocal advocate for reform, urging changes to the rules to make the sport less dangerous. Unsportsmanlike conduct. Early 20th century football was the Wild West, and unsportsmanlike conduct and unnecessary roughness didn't exist. Deliberate actions by teams were done to injure key players. During the 1905 season, Harvard walked off the field during their game against Yale after their captain was injured by an illegal hit. Roosevelt held a conference in the White House with college athletic advisors to reform the game and prohibit unsportsmanlike conduct. Character. Roosevelt stated, "I believe in outdoor games, and I do not mind in the least that they are rough games. But when injuries are inflicted by others, either wantedly or set design, it's not about the damage of a man's body, but the damage of a man's character." Roosevelt was pushing for a clean game while creating honorable men and building sportsmanship. The last one was reforming football to reduce injuries. This article was in the New York Times, October 15th, 1905. Crippling the game. There were fears among players, coaches, and fans that the game may lose its glamour by taking out the brutality element. Limitation of mass plays. A mass play known as a dog pile, where the players are in the scrum and the pile on top of one another to get the ball. This is where most injuries take place, but opponents of the change stated it rarely happens and usually is only results in minor injuries. Hearsay. Coaches and players were stating that the concept of deliberately injuring a player are unfounded and are being utilized by proponents to attempt to level the playing field for the minor teams. So looking into this, the changes made following the 1905 season also consisted of founding the NCAA in 1906 and legalizing the forward pass in 1906. That was a big deal because it opened up the game and reduced the reliance on violent physical play. These changes saved the sport of football and over time evolved into America's most popular sport. And these are my sources. Thank you.